Hi everyone, Lior here with another Jumpstart Lightning episode. Today I have a special guest with me. I have Dale to talk to me about the new things that we're coming up with ArcBox and the new ArcBox Nuts and Bolts video series. Stay tuned. Hi everyone, Lior here with another Jumpstart Lightning episode, and this one is a special one. We're kicking off ArcBox Nuts and Bolts video series, and we also have some cool things to share with you. And to do that, I have Dale with me. Dale, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Great to be on the show.
Dale, for those of you who don't know you, who you are and what is it that you do?
Yeah, well, I'm a cloud solution architect in US Global Partner Solutions here at Microsoft, where I help our partners build hybrid cloud solutions with Azure Arc. And I'm also the lead engineer for ArcBox that we're going to be talking about today. Of course, I'm backed by a really strong team that made all this possible, but really happy to represent the team today.
And Dale, we're going to have the team joining us for special episodes in part of this video series when we're going to dive deeper into the technology of ArcBox and what are the things that are included and how do we actually go by and develop this. But Dale, before we are diving into the technology in the episode and the announcement and all the cool things that we have to talk about, maybe the viewers don't know this, but you joined me about 2.5 years ago when we started the project back then, and two and a half years after. I wanted to ask you how you're feeling.
Yeah, it's hard to believe it's been that long, Lior. I'm feeling great. It's really awesome to see how much the Jumpstart project has grown, not just from within Microsoft, but within the open source community. It's really awesome to see how many partners and customers we've been able to help. Get enabled around Azure Arc and start, to build really nice hybrid cloud solutions with Azure Arc. So all of that's been really great to see. Just from 2.5 years ago till today, I could have never imagined how much this would have grown. So it's really been awesome.
Yeah, and we really appreciate the support coming from our community. That's for sure. So, Dale, I think that at this point, it's time for us to dive into the technology. And today we're here to talk about RBox. And for the viewers who don't know what RBox is, can you share with us what it
Yeah.
is?
Yeah, definitely. ArcBox is a sandbox for getting hands-on with Azure Arc. And the best part is the only thing you need to get hands-on with this sandbox is an Azure subscription.
Mm.
So you can think of, any good sandbox has lots of good toys and things like that to play around with, and that's definitely what ArcBox comes with. It's everything you need to explore Azure Arc technology. And again, all you need to get started is that Azure subscription. And so we've seen partners and customers and engineers use ArcBox as,
Mhm.
again, to train themselves on Azure Arc as an accelerator for proof of concepts or pilots with partners and customers. I've delivered hundreds of demos with Azure Arc with ArcBox, and so it's a great environment for that. You stand one up, you do your demo, and you tear it back down again. So many different ways, but you could take advantage of ArcBox. But at the end of the day, it's the de facto sandbox to really get hands on with the technology.
Dale, you and I, we had a lot of demos that we delivered using the RBox and the Jumpstart automation. So definitely something that we're also taking advantage of. Uh, Dell, this week is a special week because we are in Build Week. And today, as part of Build, we also announced the new Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes landing zone accelerator. And what I wanted to ask you is, what is the relationship between those accelerators that are part of the cloud adoption framework and the Jumpstart project and RBox specifically?
Yeah, well, just in case the viewers aren't familiar, the Landing Zone Accelerator is basically a set of recommendations and best practice guidance and a reference implementation for a particular technology, in this case, Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes. And ArcBox is the sandbox reference implementation for the Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes Landing Zone Accelerator, more specifically, the ArcBox for DevOps edition. So that's the relationship. It's literally an integral part of the Landing Zone Accelerator, and it
Mhm.
represents the reference implementation.
That's cool. So, Dell, I think that before diving into what is coming, what do we have today?
Yeah. So if you're not familiar with what until today, what we had with ArcBox, there were basically two different ArcBox flavors, and you can think of a flavor as basically a configuration for
Mhm.
ArcBox. And so we had the full flavor, which was the original ArcBox experience with capability around Arc-enabled servers, Kubernetes, and data services. And then
Mhm.
we had another flavor called ArcBox for IT pros, which is specifically focused around Azure Arc-enabled servers, and that also happens to be the reference implementation for the Arc-enabled servers landing zone accelerator. But today we're announcing ArcBox DevOps, which is basically your essential Azure Arc-enabled Kubernetes sandbox environment.
That's uh that's exciting to see. We've been working on ArcBox DevOps for a few months now, and I see the list of things that we included as part of this. So maybe just in a nutshell, Dale, what are the things that we took under consideration as we were developing ArcBox for DevOps?
Yeah, well, of course, like I mentioned, as a sandbox needs good toys to be, to be fun. We made sure we had a lot of toys in this sandbox. So you see, we've got, we're including two Azure Arc enabled uh, Kubernetes clusters.
Hmm.
On top of those clusters, we're also using a lot of the Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes capability, like integration with GitOps through the Flux operator, or integration with Open Service Mesh or Key Vault, or Azure Monitor and Cloud Defender. There's just lots and lots of toys that they were including as part of this, as part of ArcBox for DevOps, that we think really illustrate how developers and DevOps resources, DevOps personnel, can really be successful with Azure Arc and really integrate it into their DevOps practices.
So many good things. We just wanted to make sure that the experience is complete, right? And also, one of the things, or one of the questions that always pop is, how come we're not using AKS as part of this flavor? What do you have to say to these type of questions,
Yeah.
Del?
Yeah, it is a good question. AKS is a way that you can experience some Azure Arc capability, but it's just not really a natural way, right? Typically, connecting AKS as an Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes cluster is not a production scenario. It's not something you would do, quote unquote, in the real world. And so, for that reason, we decided not to use AKS. We're actually using a cluster API for Azure provider for one of our clusters, and we're using a Rancher cluster for our other cluster. And so, yeah, the reason for that is we just didn't want developers or people that were using ArcBox to kind of have to make that mental leap, or that jump through that mental hoop of having AKS be an Azure Arc enabled cluster. And on top of that, it just feels more natural to use things like Cluster API or Rancher, or Kubernetes distributions that are commonly found in the wild.
And we just wanted to have a non-opinionated way to deploy this, right? AKS is obviously a first-party service. We just wanted to do
Right.
something or present something that will be a bit more closer to the real life. So, Dale, maybe to switch gears here, let's talk about the architecture and the automation.
Yeah, definitely. So the architecture here you can see on the screen. As I mentioned, all you need for deploying ArcBox is an Azure subscription, and specifically you deploy it to a single resource group. So once I deploy ArcBox, and you can see at the top, I can deploy with ARM or Bicep or even Terraform.
Mhm.
Once I deploy an ArcBox, ArcBox takes care of the rest. The deployment will kick off, and it'll set up the two clusters that you see. So you see down at the bottom the two Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes clusters. The cluster on
Mhm.
the left is a 3-node cluster API cluster.
Mm.
And the cluster on the right is a single node Rancher cluster. And then the ArcBox automation also configures a number of other things, like the GitOps configurations, integration with Key Vault. It configures Open Service Mesh. It deploys solutions like Azure Monitor, for example, for
Mhm.
containers. And of course, it does all this as part of the ArcBox automation. So you, as a consumer of ArcBox, don't need to really be thinking about any of that. And so we can actually talk a little bit more about the automation here.
Mhm.
So when we the ArcBox automation is also built in a very modular fashion. So you see each of these boxes here on the screen represents some component of the ArcBox automation. Now, you as an ArcBox user don't necessarily have to care about any of this if you don't want to. If you just want to get hands-on and do a quick demo, you don't need to worry
Mhm.
about any of this. But if you're a developer or a partner that's building solutions with Azure Arc, and you're looking for reusable artifacts as part of your solution, well, we built ArcBox in a modular way specifically for that purpose. So each of the little boxes here represents some discrete set of automation within ArcBox that you can literally look at the code, pull out the code, and use that, for example, as a Kickstarter for a proof of concept or a pilot or another type of Azure Arc
Mhm.
hybrid cloud solution.
And you know, like one of the things that we really taken under consideration with RBox is not just the fact that we're deploying everything for you and the automation will do its thing and you will get an environment, but it's also about the teaching experience, right? And this is one of the reasons that we included those two clusters. So it's because one cluster is a cook and show cluster, right? That's the cluster that already have
Right.
things configured, but another cluster is somewhat semi-automated configured, right? Because you're going to have to do things on your own to experience also the deployment parts of the technology. So I really like that balance. And also, the architecture that we're seeing here, the automation architecture that we're seeing here is really showing the breadth of the way that we are thinking about this. And like you said, Dale, it was built with a modular fashion in mind, that because we wanted to make sure that we are getting you the right solution. We wanted to make sure that people can actually reuse this type of stuff. So I'm happy that you landed this point. I think, Dale, at this point, let's just show me the magic, like how things look like.
Yeah, let's switch over to Azure portal here. And you see here, I've got, we're looking at my Azure ArcBox resource group, ArcBox DevOps. As I mentioned, when we deploy ArcBox, it deploys to a single resource group. So
Hmm.
I can just scroll down and I can look at, we're deploying a lot of kind of core Azure services like automation accounts and Azure Monitor workbooks and things like that. But of course, we also have the two Arc-enabled Kubernetes clusters. So we
Hmm.
see my cluster API cluster here. We call it ArcBox Cappy Data. And we have my single node Rancher cluster here called ArcBox K3S. So if I just go ahead and open one of these clusters up, you can see, again, ArcBox is handling all of the automation for you, all the configuration for you, so that when you open ArcBox for the first time, you're going to have a connected cluster like we see here. But we're not just giving you an empty cluster. We're giving you a cluster with workloads that are running on it. That have been with GitOps configurations that have been pushed down to it. So in
Hmm.
this case, we were deploying applications for you that you can then also start to play around with, start to see, for example, how does a GitOps configuration work? Or how does integration with Key Vault work, for example? So all of this is part of that deployment and it's part
Hmm.
of the ArcBox automation.
And it's really cool to see that it's not just about the infrastructure, right? Because just having an Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes uh, resource, that's easy, right? But what are the things that you can actually do with that? And like we mentioned, we already took care of that for you. So I'm happy to see all these moving parts starting to meshed into those Arc enabled resources.
Yeah, and so Azure Portal is certainly one way that you might play around with Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes, but you're also going to sometimes want to do other things that are more Kubernetes, naturally Kubernetes, for example,
Hmm.
like using kubectl. So we also, as part of ArcBox, include something called the ArcBox Client, and you can see I've opened up an RDP session to my ArcBox Client here,
Hmm.
and this is where you can get a lot more hands-on with other capabilities of Azure Arc. Of ArcBox. We're including lots of tools that are kind of developer focused, like I mentioned, kubectl, Visual Studio Code, things like that. So it gives you kind of everything you need as part of that sandbox, as part of those toys, like like the analogy we've been using here,
Hmm.
that just give you everything you need to really get started. Let me show you a quick little demo of something that I think is neat.
Please.
So we've got some applications that I mentioned that we include as part of ArcBox that we deploy as part of the configuration. We've got something called the Bookstore app that's part of Open Service Mesh, and I think we'll have Zaid's going to follow up with a video on that later. But we've also got just a simple kind of Hello World app here. On our Cappy cluster. It's
Hmm.
just basically, we call it Hello Arc. It's just a very simple application that we can use to kind of showcase pushing GitOps configurations down to this cluster to deploy this application. There's something really neat though I want to show you here. Now, as part of this, as you can see, when I've connected to this website, I'm doing that over HTTPS.
Hmm.
And that's actually through a TLS certificate that's being rotated to this cluster, to this application through Key Vault. And so you can see I've got a secure connection and all that. I can, if I wanted to, I could even go check the thumbprint of this certificate
Yeah.
with the one that's in Key Vault. But that's just another type of integration that we're building in for you that I think, to your question earlier, is a very natural kind of DevOps kind of task, certificate management, key management, things like that. And showing you as a user how to do this with Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes is part of the ArcBox experience.
So, a couple of things here, Dale. Obviously, you mentioned the fact that we're going to have, like we mentioned, we're going to have other people from the Jumpstart team come in and do more demos with regards to our box. So that's super cool. But the thing that I really capturing based on that small integration that you just showed, right? When you have the HTTPS connection, you have the TLS certificate, and now you're clicking, you're seeing that it's a signed certificate. To the viewers, it might look like, yeah, sure, certificate, what's the big deal? But for us, when we're looking at Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes and the extensibility model of it, one of the things that we wanted to capture as part of our box is also the extension model, right? And Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes with Key Vault integration or GitOps and Open Service Mesh. So all those things are baked into our box. At the end result, there, like you just showed, looks very easy, right? Hey, I have a certificate. But this is the level of details that we're looking at when we're developing this.
Yeah, we don't want to give you any way. We like to say, or really, you like to say, Lior, we don't want to give you any way to fail. And so that's the attention to detail we put into the deployment, automation, and code for ArcBox.
That's super cool. So, Dale, to wrap things up with this first episode as part of ArcBox Nuts and Bolts video series and the announcement that we just shared with our viewers for ArcBox DevOps, I wanted to say thank you. Thank you for all the hard work that you've been putting into ArcBox DevOps and obviously the rest of the team. Dale, before we are wrapping things up, for folks to want to get in touch with you, what is the best way?
Well, you can certainly find me on LinkedIn really easily, or you can find me on GitHub, where you can tag me if you've got an issue with ArcBox, for example. So be sure to look us up there. We look forward to all the open source contributions we get from the community, whether it's just reporting issues that you've had, or even feature additions that some of our open source community members have contributed. So definitely look forward to hearing from you.
For sure, GitHub is the best way to reach out to us, and obviously, Dale, we're going to share all your details in the description down below. And for the Jumpstart viewers, thank you so much for supporting us thus far. Make sure that you're liking and subscribing to this video because we're coming up with a lot of things, and we want to make sure that you get notified whenever we are coming up with a new episode of Jumpstart Lightning. We're coming up with a lot of people. A lot of people are coming into this show to talk about their hybrid experience development and all the things that are in between. So again, thank you so much for joining me, Dale. Thank you for the Jumpstart viewers for staying and watching this episode. And we're going to see you next time.
All right. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.